Okay, welcome everyone to this session, The Art of Storytelling in Tech. My name is Lauren Faber, and I am a Senior Program Manager on the Power BI CAT team. And I wanted to start by talking about how storytelling is at the core of who we are as humans. There's a reason that back in the cave age, we have images carved into stone of different stories that we're told. And a reason that when we communicate day to day, we use stories to talk about the things that we have been doing, to talk about things at work or at home. If you think about our own instincts of telling some sort of story to get someone to avoid danger, saying something like, "Don't go over to that tree, it's dangerous." But if you add a story onto that of something like, "Don't go over to that tree because my cousin was eaten by a bear or a lion," you're going to remember that thing a lot more than just having one sentence and no context. Every single day, we use stories to communicate and to motivate. And that applies specifically in the tech world. Now, your job might not necessarily be one of a storyteller, but at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing, it really is. You might be trying to communicate and motivate others to use a certain product. You might be trying to get people to use more of your product. You might be trying to convince a customer why the solution that you have developed is the right one for them. Every single day when we're in these conversations at work, we are using stories, or at least we should be, to be communicating. If we tell ineffective stories, then we kind of lead to no man's land. An ineffective story can leave people confused or simply unmotivated, and then no change happens from that, and we are left at ground zero or square one again. In technology specifically, we want to make sure that we create stories that motivates our audience to act. And this can be difficult sometimes because technology can be quite complicated, especially if we're working with people and customers who don't know the ins and outs of the data and the different services like we do. So it can be a challenge to take complicated topics and to summarize them simply so that other people can understand. However, by following proven patterns of success, you can tell effective stories within technology every single day throughout your work. And you might be thinking, who are you on stage, and what qualifications do you have to tell me about the storytelling you speak of? So let's start from the beginning. Like I mentioned, my name is Lauren Faber. I grew up in Utah, and because of that, that started to shape the way that I saw the world and the way that I understood how to tell stories and context. When I was younger, I had a professional acting stint from the ages of about 12 to 13. That's me in the top left corner there. And this was the first time that I really started to understand the importance of storytelling. And I started to fall in love with a character or a conflict. And I loved being able to get into the minds of what would motivate this person or this character to do a specific thing. And I really started to understand the value of a good story and how if I was on stage and I gave a good performance, it would move people to tears or it could move them to laugh. And it was all through the way that the story was told. As I grew up, I started doing ballroom dance, and my love for storytelling deepened here. I found that there was a way to tell a story without even using words, which was amazing to me. There's something about the vulnerability and the authenticity of being on a dance floor or watching someone dance and knowing that every single move that they're making is true. You can't lie a certain hip movement or an arm movement or a step. Just through the way a body moves, you can get a story. And that was something that I really fell in love with. So I went on to go to school and accidentally fell into the tech world and graduated with my master's degree in information systems and somehow ended up going on to Microsoft, or as my sister likes to call this picture, micro hard. And I ended up on the Power BI CAT team. And when I first arrived on the CAT team, what my role was to work with customers to create case studies and customer success stories to be able to showcase the way that our customers were using Power BI and Azure effectively together. So I've been on the CAT team for almost 3 years now, and within that time, I've worked with different customers and partners around the world to create 38 different case studies and customer success stories that are public and live on Microsoft's website. I've worked with 20 different customers and partners to create different storytelling sessions at things like the Microsoft Business Application Summit. And I even spoke at one keynote last year on different customers using Power BI and their stories. So I've learned a little bit in the past 3 years, as this was a majority of my job of showcasing stories and learning how to take what these customers were doing with technology that might be quite complicated and trying to put it into a format that anyone would be able to understand. But again, while a lot of my experience comes from the case studies that I wrote, I want to emphasize that as I have been working on these stories, I've learned and noticed so much about how this can be applied to everyday situations. Being on a call and trying to summarize a customer's challenge and putting it in story format to really step back and say, what is the big picture here? Again, because in technology, it's really easy to get stuck in the weeds. So every single great story follows the same flow. And I'm sure you might have picked up on this and noticed this, but they follow very similar patterns. So I'm going to use an example from a book and a movie that I grew up loving, The Hunger Games. So the setting in The Hunger Games takes place in Pan Am. And we learn about this dystopian society where there is this capital of rich, wealthy people and these 13 districts who are starving and poor and wanting to have a better life. But what happens is there's this thing called the Hunger Games, right? Where every single year, two people are pulled from each district to go and compete in this battle to the death, where there's one person who is standing at the end to win food for their district and a bunch of glory or some stuff like that. Each story then gives us a relatable protagonist, especially because this series was written for teenagers, specifically teenage girls. Having Katniss Everdeen as a relatable protagonist makes sense. She's someone who you can see yourself in because you can see that she has struggles in her life, like all of us do, but that she's fighting to overcome them. She loves and cares about her family deeply more than anything else. And as readers are starting to get through the story, they can see themselves in her. We want someone that we can relate to, that we can see ourselves in the story. Then we introduce the conflict. In the Hunger Games, this is when Katniss's sister, Primrose, is chosen to go into the Hunger Games, and this starts off a chain of a lot of other actions that happen, but the conflict is when Katniss volunteers herself to take her sister's place and to enter the games, which then results in a path to success. And this includes Katniss training for the games, working with her team, getting sponsors and advertisements, and essentially at the end outsmarting the game and being able to not only be the last person standing, but the last person standing there with the other male who was chosen from her district to enter the games. And everything ends up in this nice little box and bow with the resolution and the conclusion. So we finally see Prim and Katniss united together at the end, and their family is back together, and Katniss has won this food for her district. So this, again, is the pattern that most successful stories follow. They have the setting, the relatable protagonist, the conflict, the path to success, and then the resolution and the conclusion. I'm going to take you back to my first days at Microsoft. This is a picture I took actually on my very, very first day. And I entered into the office and I learned a little bit more about specifically what I would be doing on the Power BI CAT team with these customer stories and these case studies. And the first story that I was given, I was a little bit overwhelmed, and I was taking in a lot of new knowledge and technologies, and I started writing my first story, and it was a complete disaster. I got so into the weeds of this story that I couldn't see the bigger picture, and none of it really made sense, and I was trying to, I think, be something and say things that I wasn't, and I wasn't following any of those patterns of a successful story at all. I was so focused on that path to success part of the story that the setting was missing, the relatable protagonist was missing, and it was a train wreck. And again, I missed following any of these steps. And luckily, I had an amazing mentor at the time, Matthew Roach, who helped guide me and bring me back to the light to help me see some of the areas where I really struggled in telling this story. And he pointed me to a blog that he had written that had 5 questions on it. And he said, next time we work on a story, let's look at these 5 questions to be able to really understand what it is we're trying to communicate to our audience. And that first question was, first of all, who is my audience? I had been so focused on the Azure data lakes and the Power BI connections and all of this technical stuff that I wasn't even thinking about who am I writing this story for. I just simply was thinking, I need to get this story written. So I stepped back and said, okay, who is my audience? And more specifically, what's my goal for communicating with this audience? I might know who they are, but why am I even telling them this story? And what does my audience care about in general? What motivates them? Why will my audience care about what I'm telling them? And how will my communication motivate my audience to take action to meet my goal? So as I continued in my role, I started to use this framework each time I did a story to understand, who am I even talking to? What motivates those people that I'm talking to? And how will the way that I'm communicating motivate them to do something and to act? Now, I want to share a story about someone who did this without even really realizing that he was following this, and what the impact of effective storytelling can do. And that man goes by the name of Tim DePledge, and he works at BP. So Tim was kind enough to let me interview him for this speech today, for this session, and tell me a little bit about how he used the art of the possible and storytelling to motivate and to change the landscape of the BI world at BP. So if we rewind back to 2017, Tim was a senior finance analyst who was living in, quite frankly, PowerPoint and Excel hell. He was spending late nights getting ready for executive meetings where they would present their numbers and their findings. And every time someone would need to change a number for one of these reports, they would find themselves in that never-ending loop where one number would need to be changed upstream, and then they'd manually have to make sure it was changed in the Excel, and then another Excel, and then updated in the PowerPoint. And so anytime anything changed, him and his team would find themselves working late nights, doing things that felt like they were way harder than they needed to be. And Tim thought to himself, there has to be a better way to do this. So because Tim's team and BP had access to Office 365 and E5 licenses for free, Tim started picking up Power BI on his own. Now, to understand more context of this story, BP and Tim's team at this time, there was no Power BI. They were not using any sort of BI tool. It was mainly just Excel, PowerPoint. So Tim said, this seems like a nifty tool. I'm going to pick it up and see what I can do with it. Maybe this will help me solve my challenge of this continual updating numbers situation that I'm in. So on nights and weekends when he had free time, Tim started teaching himself Power BI. And he quickly found wow, this makes my job a lot easier. I want to be able to have other people on my team have an easier time as well. And not only will this help those on my team, but this is going to make our meetings with executives so much better. We're going to be able to have live data where they can get the numbers that they need immediately rather than having to wait for us to get any sort of update. So what he did is he made a couple of different demos within Power BI. And he started knocking on doors. He would find anyone who would listen, and probably some people who didn't really want to listen, in their offices, at coffee breaks, after meetings, and he would flag them down and say, hey, I want to show you something. And if he was talking to a finance person on his team, he had a demo prepared that specifically showed them the numbers that they were working with and how those numbers could be utilized and effective and automated through Power BI. He would track down executives and say, hey, look at this tool that I found, have a specific demo for them that would say, we could implement this and you would have access to your numbers and your data and it would be in real time and you wouldn't even have IT as a bottleneck. And so each person that Tim talked to, he would cater his communication as he understood what motivates this individual, rather than saying, Power BI is really great and it will help us have a better business. He spoke one-on-one to each person and said, what motivates this person? Why will they even care about what I'm telling them? And how can the way that I'm communicating with them motivate them to change? So what happened was, after a while of knocking on enough of these doors, BP gave Tim a temporary assignment and said, okay, we're going to give you a team. You can go try out this Power BI thing, and if this art of the possible that you're showing us is really true, prove it to us. And so that's exactly what Tim did. I can yell, oh, is it back? There we go. Perfect. BP went from essentially having no Power BI at all in Tim's team and in this finance organization to now being one of the largest users of Power BI in the world. Tim's role even ended up changing. He went from a senior finance analyst to a transformation manager for business. And his role continues to evolve. He's gotten so good at storytelling that he is now the business advisor for digital, and his entire job is taking these solutions that people are building with Microsoft tools and creating stories to get people at his organization motivated to use them. So I don't even know if Tim realized that he was following those 5 questions that my mentor gave to me, but he did, and he did it well. He answered that question of, who is my audience? And in this case, it was 2 different audiences. It was finance people within his team and executives at BP. What was his goal for communicating with that audience? He wanted a better work-life balance for him and everyone else on his team. And he also wanted to be able to be more efficient in his job and do his job better so that they could spend time on things that mattered more than just getting the numbers together. He also wanted wide adoption of Power BI within his organization to fulfill those first 2 bullets. What does his audience care about in general, or what motivates them? For finance people, they care about being able to do their job well, easily, and more efficiently. For executives, they care about being able to make data-driven decisions with more accurate information in a way that makes sense to them. Why will the audience care about what Tim was telling them? Well, the finance people are going to see that their job is easier and they'll be able to do more in less time. The executives will be able to be better at making decisions in a faster way without waiting on that bottleneck. And the way that Tim communicated is one of my favorite parts of this story. Where Power BI might have been the method in which he was telling the story, but the context that he shared it, he changed for every single individual to really get deep down into that motivation of how to influence them to act and to change. And because he did that, this then motivated each of those people to be inclined to make that change and to finally give Tim the opportunity that he was asking for to prove that he could do amazing things with Power BI if given the chance. So I know that everyone is going to be very sad that we're moving on from finance, but I thought we might talk about a little bit more boring of a subject, and that is sports. So the next story I want to go over is a company that I worked with called Action Apps. And in the last example I gave with Tim and BP, we went through the story, and then we went over those 5 questions of understanding your audience. And so this time, I want to take it a little bit in the reverse. Now, Action Apps is a case study and a customer success story that I had the privilege of working on this customer with. And when we had the agreement to do this case study, this was an exercise that we did to go through and to make sure that we understood the audience as we were writing the story. So Action Apps is a startup that's based here in the UK, and it is Matt Groves and Bruce Rioch, who met actually doing finance in their corporate life and decided that they wanted to start their own thing, and they saw a gap within the sports world of merging modern day technology and sports. And so what we decided we wanted to do and what our motivation was for sharing this story with an audience, from the Action Apps side, their audience was decision makers at sports teams on behalf of athletes and coaches. So they wanted to reach an audience of anyone at any other sports team who's actually making the decisions for that team. Their goal for communicating with that audience, quite frankly, was to be able to get more clients and customers to work with them. Their audience cares about winning. Their audience will care about what we were going to share with them, because to win in sports, you need to have the best team. And as time progresses, we're learning more and more that data is a key component to developing the best team. And simply capturing data on our athletes isn't enough. It needed to go further to be able to actually analyze that data and make sense of it and make decisions based off of it. They'd also care about what they were telling them because of the lack of in-house IT that a lot of these sports teams have. Traditionally speaking, a lot of sports teams have to consult out for their IT, and this creates quite a few problems with owning the data that they're working with and being able to have the exact solution that they want. So the way that we decided to communicate the Action Apps story to this audience to motivate them to take action was by demonstrating the benefits and the possibilities with a custom AMS, which is an athlete management system, where those decision makers would then be inclined to partner with Action Apps. So for anyone who doesn't know what an athlete management system is, it's basically a system where all of your information on your athletes can be found hopefully in one place, where you can understand the health of the athletes, what their training looks like, and you can take all of that information and make decisions for your team. So going back to the flow of what makes a successful story, we decided to start with both the setting and a relatable protagonist. So Action Apps had worked with a team called Preston North End Football Club, and we started out the story with this relatable protagonist to any sports decision maker who would understand football. We wanted to give a specific example that people could imagine themselves in and say, I know what that's like to be part of this type of team. We wanted to make sure that we were communicating that we understood some of the challenges and the goals of both coaches and athletes. That coaches need to manage their data, that they need to be able to create training schedules and communicate that out to the athletes somehow, that they need to be able to keep the athletes happy and healthy. That one of the ways that they were currently doing this was at trainings and practices, athletes would wear devices that would track and monitor their heart rate and their exertion, but it was hard to get that data and actually do something with it. And just collecting the data was one thing, but we wanted to communicate in this story that we understood that there's more that needs to be done with that data. We wanted coaches to know that we understood things going on with the pandemic today and testing for COVID and what to do when a player has to sit on or quarantine because of COVID. We also wanted those who were reading the story to make sure that we understood the motivation behind how we work with our athletes. That the athletes need to understand and manage their own health and ways that we could incorporate data to help them do that. Athletes also need to know their training schedules. They need to be able to submit COVID tests and prepare for matches. So all of this we wanted to put in the story to, again, give that relatable protagonist and give that setting of, we know the bigger picture here. It's about more than just the athlete management system. We understand the goal that you're trying to meet. And then comes in that conflict or that challenge, just like in the Hunger Games, of when Primrose's name is drawn and PETA volunteers as tribute. We said, we understand and we want to communicate to you that we know that security of your data and the ownership of your data is a really big challenge for a lot of sports teams right now. Knowing about your athletes and what their health situation is and keeping that just to your team is massive in sports. You don't want to give your competition that edge. We wanted to communicate that we know that a lot of athlete management systems are expensive and that this is a challenge for you, that they lack a lot of flexibility and they're not one shop does not fit all. We know that you have limited access to your data and that getting the data is one thing, but actually being able to analyze it and understand it is another. We also wanted the audience to know that we understood the challenge of a single location for this data and these resources. And that for a lot of these sports teams, that data has to be found in a myriad of different places, rather than going to one location where they can see and get everything that they need at the same time. So, in comes the path to the solution. We wanted to communicate to this audience that you can take control of your own data and that we have created apps that are customizable to your own needs, enabling you to create actionable insights. And I won't go into too much detail of what that solution actually looks like today, but I do want to point out that we were putting together a demo and we really kept in mind the whole time the audience of who we were communicating to. So when we were deciding what features to put in and how to demonstrate them, making sure that we did it in a way that we never forgot about who our audience was and why they would be listening to us. So we showed the audience the solution, the athlete app, the coach app, the way that they could visualize data, showed them that path to solution. We understood that collecting a player's daily wellness is a challenge that a lot of sports teams don't have a way of solving for today. And we wanted to show that this athlete management system is different. You can collect every single day how your player is doing so that you can know what trainings to plan for them. You can know if they need to get into the physical therapist. You can know if you need to put them on the schedule at a certain time. We wanted our audience to know that we understand that the coaches need to be able to see this data that we're collecting from the athletes. And you can see it in the same place as you can see the videos that we're having our athletes watch for trainings. You can have it in the same place that our calendar is for events. And it's going to make your life easier and help your team be successful and win. Now, at the end of the day, I was helping Action Apps, or we were working together to create this story. And what I just shared with you is Action App's motivation for the story, but Microsoft has a completely different motivation, right? So in this instance, I had to think about two different audiences and make sure that I was meeting the needs of both. So the Microsoft side of the story is, who is my audience as Microsoft? It's small to mid-level companies with unique challenges. My goal for communicating with those small to mid-level companies is to get more organizations to use the Microsoft entire ecosystem to build low-code solutions. My audience cares about, in general, being able to run successful companies, easily creating holistic solutions, owning their data, flexibility, the total cost of ownership. my audience will care about this story because they'll see how Microsoft's products can help them solve their own organization's challenges. And that might not necessarily be in the sports world, but by sharing this story about how two men at a startup were able to use Microsoft's entire ecosystem to build this app from the ground up that is now successfully implemented at a football club, it'll motivate others to think about their own challenges and say, I might not be in sports, but I could use that in a solution as well. And again, that goes into how that communication motivates them to take that action to meet their goal. They'll be able to use the full Microsoft ecosystem and motivate them to be able to make solutions and creations on their own. And so really, when the Microsoft story for me came down to this slide right here of helping the audience understand that they could use our tools to build a full, holistic solution that would help them safeguard their people, data, and infrastructure, and help them with different security aspects as well. Now, we've talked a lot about the structure of understanding our audience and the flow of stories, but at the heart of every single story is that human connection. Like I started out this session with, we each tell stories every single day. And the reason that we do that is because stories help us connect to others. Now, when I'm writing technical stories, I always try and look for that human connection. In the example of Tim DePledge, that human connection was simply the fact that most of us want to have an easier time at our job, and most of us want to have work-life balance. But every now and then, I get to work on a story that has a human connection that means just a little bit more to me. So I want to share this example of this story that I had the privilege of working on with a school district in Georgia called Forsyth County School District. Now, this is one of the fastest growing districts in the United States, and it's quite a good one, actually. They have a 94% success for graduation rate. But they started to become concerned with that 6%. They really adopted that, we want no student left behind. And another Tim, who worked on data at Forsyth County School District, he realized that he could use technology to help close that gap between that 94% of people graduating and that 100. What he did is he used Azure and Power BI to be able to get data from all of the students and start tracking their performance, their grades, their test scores, their demerits, their attendance. And they put that into a graduation prediction score. So that as they were getting all these data from other reports, they had this main report that they could go in and look at and say, where are our students at and how can we help them? If a student fell into a certain threshold within this report, they would have a counselor meet with that student one-on-one and develop a customized plan to be able to help that student progress to graduation. And when I met with Tim the first time for the story, I thought this was simply going to be how a school district in Georgia was using Power BI to do something technical. And I kid you not, at the end of this call with this man, I was almost in tears because of how inspired I was about his care and love for these students. And I feel like so many people would look at a number like 94% and think, that's good enough. That's an amazing graduation success rate. But for Tim, it wasn't good enough. And he wanted to make sure that 100% of the students in that district were graduating from high school. And Tim said, you're going to see our graduation rates go up because of those students that were able to find and get help. And Power BI enabled us to do that. So now that I've shared this story with you, I want to give you a little exercise. Take 60 seconds or so and go through the questions on this slide and ask yourself, if I was the one who needed to communicate this story, how would I have answered these questions? How would I go and decide who my audience is? Why am I communicating with them? And what will motivate them? as you're wrapping that up, I want to highly encourage you, the next time you need to do a story or a presentation at work, or even an important call, to think about these questions before you enter that conversation. Think about who else is going to be on the call. What motivates the team that I'm working with? Why are they going to care about what I'm telling them? And how will the way that I tell it to them motivate them to take action and do something about it? So I want to start wrapping up the session and going over again some of the things that I've shared of characteristics that create successful stories and how you can implement them into your everyday work life and life as well. So once again, reiterating that story flow. Make sure that when you're telling a story, again, specifically in technology where we focus so much on the details, what's the setting? Someone's moving to the cloud. Okay, why are they moving to the cloud? Is it strategic? Is it because they don't want to have to maintain the infrastructure anymore? Is it for cost savings? Understand that setting. Give a relatable protagonist. In Tim at BP's situation, he understood that the relatable protagonist in the story was a finance person or an executive, and he created content that related specifically to their motivations. Then we introduce the conflict, and we talk about this is why the technology was hard to implement at first, or this was the business problem that we were trying to solve, so that when we get into that path to success and that solution, it's even more impactful than just saying to someone, here's a technical solution, this is how you build it. When you have that context and they can see themselves in the story and they understand the conflict, they're going to be more motivated to implement this path to success and the technical solution that you're sharing with them. And then you get to have that resolution and that conclusion. You get to summarize what benefits that solution will have for them or have had for others in the past and why it's important for you to implement. You're going to be able to win over stakeholders, customers, other team members when you follow these patterns of success for storytelling. But never forget the human connection in the story. It goes back to that relatable protagonist. What makes us all connected? There's always something that we can find. And as we understand that, even within technology, it's going to help us be more effective storytellers. And in the end, it all comes down to authenticity. One of the things that I love about my job, and I'm not kidding when I say I get on a call with a customer, and sometimes I can tell that they kind of seem to be giving me answers that they think I'm looking for. And I love when I can tell them, I don't work for marketing. This isn't a marketing story that I'm trying to share. I truly want to understand the challenges that you had in implementing this solution. I want to be honest about the story that we're telling and that we're sharing, because people can tell when they're being lied to, and they know when something is too good to be true. And so that authenticity and being honest in those stories that you're telling will wrap everything together and make it even just that much more effective. So I want to say thank you so much for coming today. Here's the link and the QR code to the survey for this session. I would appreciate so much if you could fill it out. I know that SQL Bits is doing some amazing things with planting a tree for every 10 submissions, and you can even get a prize. But I think we have a couple minutes left that if anyone has questions or there's any questions online, I'd love to be able to answer now. But thank you all so much for coming. Do we have any questions in the room or online? Great. That means I did perfect, right? Thank you all so much.